The plot thickens with every passing second, keeping you guessing until the very end. Stay on the absolute edge of your seat with our latest collection of cinematic tales and dark mysteries. Subscribe now and hit the bell for every update.
On our 10th anniversary, I sat alone at the table we'd reserved 6 months in advance. The candles had burned down an inch. My phone showed 11 missed calls, all from my mother, not one from my husband. When he finally picked up, I could hear music in the background. Laughter. The clinking of glasses. "Hey." His voice was flat, almost bored. "I should have called earlier. I'm in Napa." I didn't say anything. I was trying to process the word Napa, the drive, the planning, the deliberate choice not to tell me. "With who?" I asked. A pause. Then a sound I will never unhear for the rest of my life, my best friend's voice, low and warm, saying his name the way she used to say mine. "We need to talk when I get back," he said. I set the phone down on the white tablecloth, next to the untouched bread basket and the champagne flute I had not touched. The waiter came over and asked if I was ready to order. I looked up at him, and I said, very quietly, "I think I need a moment." I had been married to my husband for 10 years. I had known my best friend for 17. And in the space of one phone call, on the night I thought we were celebrating a decade of building something together, I understood that I had been the last person in the room to know the truth. That is where my story begins. Not at the end, even though it felt like one. At a table set for 2, in a restaurant I could no longer afford on my own salary because I no longer had one. His name was Daniel. We met when I was 26, fresh out of my architecture license exam, working for a small firm in Charlotte. He was in commercial real estate, confident and well-dressed, and very good at making you feel like the only person in the room. We dated for 2 years, got engaged, and by 29 I had moved into his house in a suburb I had never imagined living in, with a yard I didn't know how to maintain and neighbors who waved from driveways. He never asked me to stop working. Not once, not directly. What he did was make suggestions that accumulated quietly over years, the way sediment does. "You're exhausted, maybe take on fewer projects." Then, "The commute is killing you, isn't it?" Then, after our daughter was born, "It doesn't make sense financially with daycare what it costs." Just for now. Just for now lasted 6 years. By the time our son arrived, I had let my professional development memberships lapse. My drafting software was 2 versions behind. I still thought of myself as an architect. The way you think of yourself as a runner, when you haven't run in 4 years, technically true, emotionally complicated. Daniel handled everything financial. He said it was easier, that he understood the accounts, that I didn't need to worry. He said don't worry often. He said it the way people say calm down, not as comfort, but as instruction. I raised 2 children. I ran a household. I organized our lives with the precision of someone who had been trained to build things that don't fall down. I just hadn't been applying that precision to anything with my name on it. My best friend's name was Claire. We had been close since our first year of college, the kind of friendship that survives, moves, and marriages, and the years when you stop calling as often but pick back up like no time passed. She was single for most of our 30s, funny about it in that way that made you think she was fine. She came to birthday, dinners, and school plays. She stayed in the guest room at Christmas. I had introduced her to Daniel. He came home 3 days after the Napa call. I had not cried. I want to be clear about that. I had sat with what I knew, turned it over, and made a decision that surprised even me. I would not react until I understood exactly what I was reacting to. He walked in on a Sunday afternoon, rolling his suitcase across the hardwood I had picked out. He looked tired and slightly guilty, and already, I thought, preparing his version of events. "The kids are at my mother's," I said. He sat down. He told me that he and Claire had feelings for each other. That it had been building for over a year. That he hadn't meant for it to happen. That he still cared about me, but that he hadn't been happy, and here he paused, as if the word happy were something I had stolen from him. "You're smart," he said, near the end of the conversation, in the tone of someone offering a consolation prize. "You'll be fine. You always land on your feet." I looked at him for a long moment. Then I said, "I'll need copies of everything. Every account, every asset, every document with both our names on it." He blinked. He had expected tears, I think. Or pleading. Or at minimum, some version of falling apart that would let him feel like he was leaving a situation rather than causing one. Of course, he said, recovering quickly. We'll make this as smooth as possible. I nodded. I did not tell him what I was already thinking. His home office had a lock on the door. Not a deadbolt, just a push-button privacy lock, the kind you find on bathroom doors. The kind that opens with a flathead screwdriver or a thin coin. I had known about this for years and never thought about it. Now I thought about it. I waited until he left for work on Tuesday. Then I opened the door. The room was orderly in a way the rest of our house was not. No children's drawings on the walls, no family photos, nothing soft. Degrees and a few framed deal announcements. A filing cabinet. His desktop computer, which I did not touch. A paper organizer on the desk with labeled tabs. I was not snooping for evidence of the affair. I already knew about the affair. I was looking for something else, the shape of our finances, which I had been gently, consistently, deliberately kept away from for the better part of a decade. What I found took me 2 hours to work through. Some of it I understood immediately. Some of it I photographed and sent to my personal email before I fully knew why. What I can tell you is this. Daniel was good at real estate. He was also good at structuring things, accounts, assets, entities in ways that were technically legal and practically obscuring. The kind of structures that make a marital estate look much smaller than it is, if you don't know where to look. I didn't know where to look. But I knew someone who did. Marcus had been 2 years ahead of me in architecture school. We had stayed loosely in touch the way you do with people you respect but rarely see a congratulations message when he launched his own firm, a like on a project announcement. He was also, in the years since school, married to a family law attorney named Sandra who was known, apparently, in Charlotte legal circles, for being exceptionally thorough. I texted Marcus on a Tuesday evening. I said I was going through something difficult and asked if Sandra ever took referrals. She called me the next morning. I sat in her office that Thursday with the photographs I had taken and a legal pad of notes I had written from memory, reconstructing everything I could recall about our finances from 6 years of half conversations and offhand comments. Sandra listened without interrupting. When I finished, she looked at the legal pad for a moment, then looked at me. "How long have you been out of the workforce?" she asked. 6 years, I said. "I'm an architect, licensed. My continuing education has lapsed." "We can work with that," she said. "The question isn't whether you can work again. The question is whether the settlement reflects what you actually contributed." She took the case. Daniel did not expect me to fight. I think, in his mental model of our marriage, I had become someone who deferred to him, to circumstance, to the path of least resistance. He had watched me do it for years. He had, in certain ways, cultivated it. What he did not account for was the fact that I had spent 6 years running a household with military efficiency, that I had been trained to manage complex projects, that I was constitutionally incapable of accepting a design that didn't hold structural weight. His attorney sent an initial proposal in the 3rd week. Sandra and I reviewed it together. The number they were offering for spousal support assumed I would re-enter the workforce immediately, at a mid-level salary, as if the 6 years had been a brief sabbatical rather than a career interruption that had compounding consequences. "He thinks you're going to take this," Sandra said. "I know," I said. "He's wrong." The negotiations lasted 4 months. Every time his side lowered an offer or shifted terms, I did not panic. I went home, I put the kids to bed, I sat at the kitchen table with my legal pad and my laptop and I worked. I re-enrolled in my continuing education courses. I reached out to my old firm. I began rebuilding what I had let lapse, one requirement at a time, in the hours between school pickup and midnight. At the 3rd hearing, Daniel looked at me across the conference table with an expression I had not seen before on his face. Something recalibrating. His attorney had arrived expecting to close. Sandra had arrived with 3 additional exhibits. We did not close that day. Claire called me once, in the 2nd month. I let it go to voicemail. She said she was sorry. She said she hadn't planned it. She said she hoped we could eventually, and here there was a pause, that particular pause people use when they know the sentence they're about to finish is not going to land well. Understand each other. I did not call back. I had nothing to say that would have served me. What did surprise me was my parents. My mother had known Claire almost as long as I had. She had cooked for her, driven her to the airport, treated her like a second daughter for the better part of 2 decades. When I told my parents what had happened, my mother was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, I always thought she took too much. My father, who is a man of very few words, said, "What do you need?" Those 4 words, "What do you need?" broke something open in me that all of Daniel's explanations and Claire's apology had not. I cried for the first time that night. Not from grief, exactly. From the relief of being seen correctly by people who had every reason to be confused. My parents drove to Charlotte that weekend. My mother stayed for 2 weeks. She took the kids to school. She made dinners. She sat with me at the kitchen table on the nights I couldn't stop going over the numbers and said, very simply, "You're going to come out of this more yourself than you've been in years." She was right. The settlement was finalized on a Wednesday in October. I will not list the terms in detail, because that is not the point. The point is that it was fair, genuinely, documentably fair, in a way that the initial proposal had not been and would never have been if I had simply signed what they put in front of me. Daniel's attorney shook Sandra's hand afterward with the particular grip of someone conceding a tennis match. Daniel did not look at me on the way out of the conference room. I noticed, and then I let it go. Sandra walked me to my car. She said, "You know, most people in your position don't do what you did." "What did I do?" I asked. "They show up," she said. "They prepare. They don't fall apart in front of the other side." She paused. "Where are you going now?" I told her. I had been invited to London. This requires a small amount of explanation. In the months during the negotiation, the late nights, the continuing education modules, the slow reconstruction of a professional identity I had set aside, I had been doing something else as well. I had been drawing again. Not construction documents or working drawings. Just design. Concepts I had been carrying around half-formed for years that had never had anywhere to go. I had started posting them, quietly and without much expectation, on a design platform I had used briefly in my late 20s. A design consultancy in London had found them. They were putting together a collaborative studio showcase designers and architects from the US and UK presenting original residential concepts. They had reached out 6 weeks earlier asking if I would be interested in attending and presenting a piece. I had said yes before I fully processed what I was agreeing to. My mother offered to take the kids for the long weekend. My son, who was 7, asked if London had double-decker buses. My daughter, who was 10 and had recently decided she was going to be an engineer, asked if I was going to build something there. "Not yet," I said. "But I'm going to show them what I could build." She considered this. Then she said, "That's good enough for now." I almost started crying in the school carpool lane. I flew into Heathrow on a Thursday morning, running on 4 hours of sleep and the particular energy of someone who has been moving fast for so long that stopping feels more dangerous than continuing. The consultancy had arranged accommodation in Shoreditch, a flat above a coffee shop, small and bright, with a drafting table by the window that I'm fairly sure was placed there intentionally for guests like me. I spent Thursday afternoon walking. Not sightseeing, exactly, just moving through a city that had no memory of who I had been for the last 10 years. No neighbors who had watched me become smaller. No roads I had driven to school pickup 1,000 times. Just streets and bridges and the Thames in the early evening light and the feeling of being, for the first time in a very long time, genuinely anonymous. The showcase was Friday evening, in a converted warehouse space in East London. There were 23 designers presenting. I was one of 4 from the United States. The work ranged from product design to large-scale architectural installations, and the room was full of the particular energy of people who care seriously about what they make. I presented a residential concept I had been developing for 3 months, a modular family home designed around the idea of earned space in rooms that could expand or contract based on how a family actually lived rather than how they were expected to live. The concept had come from somewhere personal, I won't pretend otherwise. But it stood on its own as design work, independent of where it came from. The response was better than I had anticipated. Afterward, standing near the window with a glass of wine I was mostly holding for something to do with my hands, I was approached by a woman named Genevieve who ran a residential architecture firm in Edinburgh. She asked questions about the structural logic of the modular system. Then she asked if I was currently taking on consulting work. I said I was rebuilding my practice and would be open to conversations. She handed me her card. "Call me next week," she said. "I have a client project that's been missing something. I think you might be it." I looked at the card for a moment. Then I took a photo. Not for Daniel. Not for Claire. I want to be very precise about this. I took the photo because my daughter had asked me to show her where I was and what I was doing, because she had a school project about careers and had decided at the last minute that she wanted to include her mother. I sent it to her with a short message. At an architecture show in London. They liked what I made. She sent back a voice memo. I could hear her holding the phone too close to her mouth, the way she always does, saying, "Mom, that's so cool. Can I use this for my project?" I sat down on a low bench near the entrance of the gallery and listened to that voice memo twice. When I looked up, my phone had one notification from a number I recognized. Daniel, who had presumably seen the photo through our daughter's shared family account, had sent a message that said, "Looks like you're doing well." I read it. Then I put my phone in my bag, picked up my wine, and walked back into the room. There was nothing to respond to. He had said I would be fine, as if that were a prediction. It wasn't. It was something I had decided. I came home on Sunday to 2 children who had eaten too much sugar at my mother's house and a kitchen that smelled like the lasagna she always makes when she wants to say "I love you" without having to say it directly. My son ran into the hall and asked if I had brought him anything from London. I had. My daughter waited until he had run off to the living room and then hugged me for a long time without saying anything. "Was it good?" she asked finally. "It was," I said. "Are you going to go back?" I thought about Genevieve's card, which was in the front pocket of my carry-on. I thought about the drafting table by the window in Shoreditch. I thought about what it had felt like to walk through a city that didn't know my name yet. "I think so," I said. "But I'll be back. I'm always coming back." She seemed satisfied with this. She went to find her brother. My mother was in the kitchen, cutting the lasagna into portions with the careful geometry she has always applied to tasks that other people treat carelessly. She looked up when I came in. "Well?" she said. "I have a potential project in Edinburgh," I said. "A consulting call next week." She set down the knife. She looked at me for a moment the way mothers look at their children when they are trying to decide whether to say the thing they have been thinking for a long time. "I knew," she said finally, "that you were going to come back to this. I just didn't know it would take something like this to get you here." "Neither did I said. She picked the knife back up and finished cutting. Neither of us said anything else. We didn't need to. The call with Genevieve happened on a Tuesday. It lasted 90 minutes. By the end of it, I had agreed to consult on a residential project outside Edinburgh, a family home on a difficult hillside plot that 3 other architects had declined as too structurally complicated. I accepted it because it was too structurally complicated. I had spent 10 years overseeing a household that functioned smoothly enough that no one noticed the difficulty. I understood complicated structures. I knew how to make them hold. My continuing education credits were completed by the end of that month. My license, fully reinstated, arrived as a PDF on a Thursday afternoon. I printed it out and put it on the wall above the drafting table I had bought secondhand and set up in the corner of the spare room, the room that had been a guest room for years, that had hosted Claire more times than I could count, that I had repainted in October and was slowly turning into something that was mine. I thought about what it would have looked like if I had signed that first settlement offer. The smaller number. The assumption of immediate re-entry. The version of events in which I was grateful for whatever was handed to me and asked no further questions. I thought about it and I felt something that was not quite anger and not quite satisfaction. A kind of clear-eyed accounting. I had given years. I had given focus and energy and the kind of sustained invisible labor that only becomes visible when it stops. I had been told, in various ways, not to worry, not to push, not to take up too much space with my ambitions. And then, when it mattered, I had pushed anyway. Quietly. Methodically. In the hours that were mine when no one was watching. 6 months after London, I flew to Edinburgh. My mother came to stay with the kids. My son made me promise to bring him something with a castle on it. My daughter gave me a list of questions to ask Genevieve about structural engineering because she had decided that was what she wanted to study, and she wanted data. The hillside plot was everything the other architects had described. Steep gradient, problematic soil composition, a sight line that made conventional foundation approaches impractical. I stood on the site for an hour the first afternoon, walking the grade, taking notes, thinking about load distribution and the way the ground moved in that part of Scotland in a wet winter. By the second day I had a preliminary concept. On the third day, standing outside in the late afternoon with the light going gold across the hillside and the sound of the wind coming off the estuary, I thought about the woman sitting alone at an anniversary dinner table with a bread basket she never touched. I thought about her with something close to tenderness, the way you think about someone who survived something difficult without knowing yet that they would. I pulled out my phone and took a photo of the sight. Then I called my daughter. She answered on the second ring. "Are you on the hill?" she said immediately. "I'm on the hill," I said. "What does it look like?" I described it to her. The gradient, the light, the way the estuary curved at the far edge of the view. She asked 3 questions, all of them structural. All of them good. "Mom," she said, before we hung up, "I want to do this. When I grow up, I want to do exactly this." I looked out at the hillside. At the problem of it, the beautiful specific difficulty of it. At the thing I had been trained to do and had been talked out of doing and had come back to, finally, not because someone gave me permission but because I had stopped waiting for it. "Then you will," I said. "I'll teach you everything."